On this episode of Doing the Most, it's our piece of the Great Mead Project, a corn, mango, and pepper mead.
Homemade brews and various how-tos, everything from mead to roast, bake creation, fermentation, inebriation, doing the most.
If you follow brewtube, specifically MeadTube, you've probably seen by now the Great Mead Project. It's something we launched as a collaborative effort between 10 different mead-making brewtube channels. We all came together and decided on a core set of ingredients we were going to brew with, and then we all went our separate ways to see what we could brew. In a Zoom meeting, we brainstormed what we could do. We went through a lot of different options, but what we ended up settling on was mangoes, corn, and peppers, hot, question mark? And we were also going to use clover or wildflower honey, just a real basic honey that wouldn't get in the way of other flavors. So the challenge was set. We were all going to go and brew something with corn, mango, and peppers, and I wanted to really take it in a doing the most direction. And I had plans to brew a corn cob wine, which is actually aging right over here right now. And so I was going to have a lot of leftover corn from that project anyway, that my plan was to just eat it, like have corn every night for a year until it was all gone. Fortunately, this project took care of that. So I used the corn from the corn cobs from my corn cob wine, then had to think of some way to incorporate the pepper and the mango. I decided I kind of wanted just some acid from the mango, a little bit of that fruitiness, so that was going to go into secondary, and I wasn't going to use a whole heck of a lot of it. But for the pepper, I wanted to go a direction that I didn't think anyone else was going to go. And years ago, I had this beer that was a Hatch green chili beer that was just really rich and malty, but also had that big, bold, smoky, vegetable-y Hatch green chili flavor in a way that really, really worked. And so my goal was to try and mimic that in a mead. So you're going to see in here, we're going to use some maltodextrin to thicken this mead up. It is going to be brewed as a hydromel. And again, the mango and the peppers are going into secondary. So hopefully they bring kind of the fullness of the flavor of those ingredients in the capacity that we're adding them. And then we'll be sweetening with a non-fermentable sweetener called erythritol that tastes pretty close to sugar and hopefully bottle conditioning. But spoiler alert, I opened several bottles that didn't carbonate, but I've also opened one that did. And our buddy Carlos on the wrap-up video from Texas Longhouse Mead, a bottle that I gave him when he was here visiting, also carbonated. And so we may open a few bottles and see if we can find one in here that's sparkling. But first, let's take a look at the ingredients for this project and the process. The ingredients for our corn mango pepper mead are 17.5 pounds of corn, 6 pounds of clover honey, 4 grams of wine tannin, 3 grams of citric acid, water to 4 gallons, and a Kveik Lutra yeast slurry. In secondary, we'll be adding 3 pounds of chopped mangoes, 6 roasted Hatch green chilies, 8 ounces of maltodextrin, and 1 pound of erythritol. We begin this mead making adventure by using 17.5 pounds of corn. This corn has been frozen, and I am putting it right into the brew kettle here. I saved the cobs from this corn for a batch of corn cob wine. That wine is currently aging. I then put a few gallons of water in with the corn and threw that on the stove to heat up. I brought that to a rolling boil. Once that was done boiling, I took it off the heat and placed it inside my mash tun. And then once that came down to mashing temperature in the mid 150s, I added some amylase enzyme. Amylase enzyme will help convert some of the starches into sugars, so hopefully I get a little bit more fermentability out of the corn. I then placed the mash tun in my brew space and allowed that to cool even further. By the next morning, it was still in the 130s, but I went ahead and added some glucoamylase. This is a different kind of amylase. The amylase enzyme we added originally was alpha amylase. Glucoamylase will help break down anything else that's in here. I don't know that it had really any effect, but I kind of wanted to throw the kitchen sink at this. So I covered that again and let that cool to room temperature. Once it was finally cooled down, I placed my silicone tubing on the spigot and got that racked off. And as you can see here, this filled up about half of the carboy. I decided to take a hydrometer reading. It was about 1.020, so now time to add in our honey. I was kind of guessing here and went with 6 pounds of honey, thinking that would get me to a pretty decent place ABV wise. Stir, stir, stir to get that all mixed up into the corn water. And then I added my wine tannin. This will help give it a little bit of grip on the palate. And my citric acid just to give it a little bit of freshness. Stir, stir, stir. And I'll top that off with the rest of my filtered water. As you can see, I left a little headspace in here. That's because of how heavy-handed our secondary additions are going to be, and I'm not going to rack it to secondary. I'm going to put all those in right after primary finishes. Our starting gravity here was 1.062. Then I pitched this Lutra Kveik yeast slurry. This had been used in a previous batch of a different brew, and I just kept the love going by moving it over to this one. The next day, I added about 12 grams of Fermade O, just so it has plenty of nutrient to finish up primary. And then later on, I put some peppers on the grill. These are sold as hatch green chilies. Obviously, to get that real hatch green chili flavor, you have to roast them. So I roasted them over an open fire here. The goal is to get a nice char on the outside so you can blister the skin on those, and then they go into a bucket of ice water. After they've had some time to chill, you just peel that skin right off. Comes off very easily, and then just chop them all up and put them into a bag. And I decided to go ahead and freeze these because fermentation wasn't quite done yet. I wasn't ready to add my secondary stuff in just yet. So these went into a plastic bag and into the freezer. Easy peasy. So once fermentation had finished, I went ahead and added those hatch green chilies in, as well as my bag of frozen mango chunks. And these needed a little bit of coaxing to get through the funnel. I put my airlock back on and then gave that another couple of weeks. Once that secondary fermentation had finished and everything had kind of flocculated out other than what was riding on top of the CO2, it was time to get it racked off and cleared. On racking, I'm adding our maltodextrin to make sure that gets all mixed in. And then also adding our erythritol to back sweeten with. Once that had cleared, it was time to add our priming sugar to this batch, get that stirred in and get it bottled with the hopes that this will carbonate up into a nice, crispy, hatch green chili forward kind of beverage. And that was the hope. I really wanted the corn to be kind of the base, while the mango added some acidity and fruitiness, but I really wanted the hatch green chilies to be kind of forefront and central to the flavor profile. But carbonation was really going to be make or break in helping carry that flavor around in a way that just didn't taste like getting a scoop of vegetables. So again, the hope is that we have some sparkle somewhere in one of these bottles, but it's a good lesson learned that maybe when you have such a nice crystal clear mead going into bottles, might be a good idea to rehydrate and dose with some wine yeast to make sure you get some sparkle in there by adding some fresh yeast to your already very clear mead. That's a good sign. Okay, the first one we opened is nicely sparkling. Good cascade of bubbles coming out of the bottom. That's a relief because I didn't want to have to open a bunch of these and dump them out. So, great. Let's give it a taste. It smells like hatch green chilies. Like on the nose, it smells like smoky green chilies. Like it kind of makes me want like a chili dog with green chilies on top. It could be just a little bit sweeter. I might up the erythritol by like 50% just to give it a little bit more of that mead-like character, that honey character. But man, the hatch green chili on it is nice. It is forward. It is the dominant flavor in there, backed up by just a little bit of that sweet corn flavor on the back end. You really have to search to find the mango in there. It presents as a little bit of like a fruity acid, and I almost want a little bit more mango flavor. Like I may double or triple the mango if I was gonna do this again, just to get a little bit more of that fruity punchiness in there. But if you're a fan of hatch green chilies and you're willing to drink something that has a little bit of that green chili pepper flavor, this checks that box. I do think I would want it to be more carbonated than it is. At this point, it's kind of like highly petulant, just like bordering on sparkling. There's still a cascade of bubbles coming up, but I almost want kind of a real flow of bubbles to help carry that flavor back just a little bit more than it does. I also might want to double the maltodextrin in here to give it a little bit more of that chew, a little bit more thickness, a little bit more cling around the palate. But I think overall the body is nice. I'm probably kind of splitting hairs looking for flaws there. It is oddly refreshing. The heat level is, I think, perfect for the pepper that I chose. If I had to give this a rating, I'd give it like 4 stars out of 5, maybe 3.5 stars out of 5. There are definitely areas of needed improvement, particularly in the carbonation world. But overall, for a first go at a kind of weird idea like corn mango hatch green chili, I think this is mostly a success. I definitely think it's something that I will explore brewing again, maybe closer to summertime. I hope you've enjoyed the Great Mead Project. I hope you've enjoyed all these cool videos that have come out from all the other channels. I know our videos kind of last in that lineup, and then here in a few days, in that same playlist, we'll have a wrap-up video where we all got back together and discussed our projects, which I think was pretty fun. Throughout the week, I hope you also took the time to subscribe to all the other channels if you hadn't subscribed to them already, because there's a lot of really diverse content in the mead world out there, and I think it's really important to look at other perspectives other than just the one that you see featured here on Doin the Most when you're exploring your foray into homebrewing, whether you're a beginner or an expert. I think it's cool to see different styles, different takes, and different opinions on what mead can be. And of course, you can join our Discord server or follow us on any of the things listed here on your screen. And, you know, happy brewing. Here's to being adventurous, taking risks, and trying something a little outside the box with a flavor profile typically more suited to food than drink. And happy holidays.